And honestly, I'm so grateful in hindsight that was the day where I realized like, oh, something is really fucking wrong here. This is not okay. Because if I would have continued on that path and 20 years later I would catch myself, I would fucking jump off a cliff because I would have been miserable.
Welcome everyone. Another episode of Uncover Podcast. I'm here today with Darius Mora, short for Moravchik. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. That's probably my Polish background that I can get your surname quite right. I want to real quickly introduce Darius. He's one of the beautiful souls I met back in Portugal in 2010. And we spent some very memorable moments, and I'd love to share some of his beautiful stories, the ways he looks at life and the ways he could help other men to lead more meaningful and thoughtful lives. So welcome, Darius.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm tremendously honored. I'm grateful. I'm excited. You've become a good friend. And although we're all sad that you moved out to Bali now, but I'm happy that we get to connect this way.
Hopefully I'll be back at some stage, but Indonesia and Bali has been very good for me right now. Without further ado, I'd love to jump into just a simple check-in. This has become a staple at the beginning of every episode. So slowly going to close our eyes and going to start breathing. Inhaling through our nose and exhaling through our mouth, arriving closer and closer to this moment. Also, I would highly recommend for the audience to do so as well, unless you're driving a car. Arriving closer to this moment and starting to connect with that inner voice, that gut feeling that we all have. I'm going to ask you a few questions that I love for you to lead with. The beginning of our conversation. I feel
calm. I love mornings. And this morning specifically. I fear that I'm not enough.
And I need
to give myself the space to relax and take it easy.
Very powerful. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna share mine as well. I feel very grateful for you being here in this container with me. I love progress and learning and growing and all the challenges I've received since coming to Bali. I fear also that sometimes I'm not enough, although I do my best, and I need being less judgmental of myself.
Thank you for sharing, brother.
Thank you. Most welcome. With that being said, I'd love to start with maybe sounding like a heavy question, but with my experience, it comes to a beautiful place and a beautiful place of reflection. And I'd love to invite you to think for a moment about this situation where if you were to be told today, after we finish rolling this podcast, you receive news that you have 365 days to live. Very happy, very, very very healthy, but there's a clock, 365 days. How would you change your daily life to align yourself with what you're looking for in life and what makes you content every night or every day?
What a beautiful question to kick off the podcast with. Mortality is something I have been thinking a lot about lately. About 9 months ago, my mom was diagnosed with cancer and she started treatment last November. So chemo and radiation, all of that stuff. And she's back in Slovakia. So I flew back and I spent 2 months with her, driving her to the hospital every day, going to the doctor's appointments and being there with her. And so looking at mortality right in the face every single day for 2 months. And since then with my mom as well. She's gone through the treatment and she feels great now. She's recovering and we'll see where the future takes her, but she has a good quality of life. And she even came to visit me 2 weeks ago. We went surfing.
That's fantastic.
But that was my first, not first, but that was I was faced directly with death in this intense way. And at the same time, not related to this, but I started to do some inner work on myself, and actually started a bit before that, where 2 years ago I had a massive burnout episode. And my entire life I was this super happy, super energetic, super positive guy. And it's great, but I was ignoring negative emotions. For me, it was mainly sadness and anger. And I was ignoring darkness in general. And with starting to do this work, I started to face the darkness and the negative emotions. And death and mortality was one of them. And so
Of
all
course.
of this has been kind of new because I pushed it away for such a big period of my life. But when you shut down the negative stuff, you also shut down the positive stuff. And I said, I want to live a full life on both ends of the spectrums. I want the highs and I want the lows, because the numb middle is not very good from my experience. So that's the background to answer the question of, I've been actually thinking about this almost on a daily basis, on mortality and on purpose and on meaning and within myself as well. And if I'm being brutally honest, I don't think I would change much right now. Yesterday, I was reading this novel and I read a beautiful quote, and it said, in the novel, it said, even if I knew that the world was going to end tomorrow, I would still plant an apple tree today. And I think that's how I would continue doing it. Honestly, in terms of, I've redefined what success means to me. For me, success is the depth and distance of your contribution. And that's where I'm putting most of my effort now. I'm trying to find the best ways where I can contribute and I can serve. And I've put my heart out there. Also, recently, I've been willing to fight for love. And so I think those are the two main things, and I wouldn't change any of that. Continue searching for purpose, continue serving, continue fighting for love.
Beautifully said. And what you said about this novel and the quote, I think the first thought that came to my mind when you shared it, I've never heard it, by the way, before. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I used to always think about the end goal. What's at the end? The success, the money, this, that. And I switched to the journey. And when you say I'd still plant a tree, I feel it's really deeply connected to, that's my journey, that's my day. Every day is a journey. And it also brought me this quote, I think it's by Seneca, that every day is a new life for a wise man. And I always ask this question at the beginning because I feel it grounds me listening to your answer, but also I feel it grounded you. And I want to ask you a little follow-up question on this, because you have come across a lot of adversity recently, as you mentioned, with your mom and with your relationship, and thinking about mortality. How would you say how important it is for us to not avoid thinking about us being mortal? Because I think a lot of people say, oh, live in the moment. You might not wake up tomorrow. Yes, but there's a different meaning to that. And there's a different meaning, in my opinion, to feeling that, yes, you could perish tomorrow, but also not really think about that, knowing that we will end at some stage. However, showing up every day, however mundane it could be, knowing that the path that you're on is right. And I'm very happy that you said you wouldn't finish a lot, you wouldn't change a lot, because this is the knowing, right? And coming back to that, how do you know that the path that you're on right now is right? How would you describe, let's say, for someone who is trying, someone who is changing a lot, inviting a lot of change in their life, or wanting to change but don't know why or how would you know that you're on the right path?
I think that you don't have to know whether you're on the right path. I think you are inherently on the right path, not because it's taking you where you want to go, but it's taking you where you need to go. And the moment you let go of where you want to go and you invite and accept with gratitude of where you are and where you need to go, I think that's where the magic happens.
So coming back to the journey rather than the destination.
Yeah, during my last big psychedelic session, the big kind of takeaway, the big theme or the big vision I had was forget about the castles, focus on the bricks. I've always described myself as a builder, and I am a builder, whether I'm building a software product or a company or a community or a house or in my free time, I love doing carpentry. Like I'm building a vinyl player box right now, whatever. And being this builder of sorts, it was so clear to me. And it's what you talked about earlier. It's, you know, this future vision. And the big thing, like it was so obvious. Forget about the castles, focus on the bricks. Put one brick today, and another one tomorrow, and another one tomorrow. The best that you can. And that's that. And I think having the vision of the castle is beautiful. I think we still need to have visions, and I'm not against goals. I'm very happy with having goals. But I realize that for me, there's a difference between what I call wish and wisdom. So wish is what comes from the ego, what you want to get out there, what you see in around you in culture, and it's the ego, and it's screaming at you. That's the wish. And then there's the wisdom, which comes from your soul, and it's the truth. And that's where the real genius is. It's the scary stuff, but it's the truth. But the problem is that the wisdom whispers and the wish screams. And all of my goals before came from the wish. And I got the goals, and there's some great things, and they provide. But I'm very glad that the burnout showed me that I need to start looking at the goals that come from the wisdom. And the goals from the wisdom are the really scary stuff, where you ask yourself, like, I'm not sure if I'm the right person for this, and you're not sure if you can do it, and it's scary, but that's the intuition. And so I think there's nothing wrong with goals and visions, as long as you know where they come from. If they come from the right place, they'll take you to the most beautiful growth and journey. Rather, if you go after the goals from the wish, you'll kind of keep running around in circles, and it'll feel empty.
In the end, it will feel empty, right? I completely second what you said. And it's such a beautiful way of putting it, as a wish and a wisdom. And you mentioned your burnout, second time now. And I'd love for our listeners to maybe hear a short version of how it came about. But I think what would be the most important for them to listen or hear is how you realized that you were having a burnout, which is basically a fancy way of saying you were having episodes of depression, and how as a man you felt, what brought you there, but also what helped you to realize and get help.
Yeah. So the day I remember the day that I realized I had burnout vividly, or the day I accepted it for the first time. I was in Copenhagen, Denmark, and I was there just for a few months. And I was sitting in my home office, and I woke up in the morning, kind of same as usual as I've been for the last few months, nothing special. And all I really had to do that day was open my computer and answer this one email, which was like the only kind of important thing. It wasn't like urgent or big thing. I just had to open my computer, respond to the email, and then the rest of the kind of daily tasks that you do, at work. So I sit down at the computer, I open my email, and I kind of just stare at the email. And I know I'm supposed to respond, but I can't get myself to do it. And I kind of just sit there for like a minute, and then 10 minutes passes and 30 minutes, and I'm sitting there and I feel numb, like I can't move my arms, I can't do anything. And then I'm just staring at the white wall, and a long time passes, and then I'm like, what the hell is going on? It was so surreal, where it's like there was a force, like in my brain, I wanted to do this instant email. Like I had this we create this pressure to do things, and that's great because you can do them. But there was some force inside of me that was way stronger that just said no. we're not going to do that. That was the day where I realized, like, oh, something is really fucking wrong here. This is not okay. This is not normal. So that was the day. Leading up to it, for months, I had typical symptoms, I would say, but I didn't admit it, didn't recognize them, because like I said before, I was this like always cheery, always positive guy. I was, Darius Mora. Like, I had all this image and the brand, and I could not possibly have any mental health issues, or I could not possibly have burnout or depression. Like, that's just not, that's not even in my universe. And
The
so the
persona that
symptoms,
you created, was so strong that it wouldn't even cross your mind.
yeah. And the identity we create is the most powerful driving force in our behavior. And so my identity was always happy, always grateful. And if you ask my friends around me, that's what they would say. Like, that's what I was. But I was so good at running away from all the negative stuff, what we call negative. It's still good. It's still valuable. Maybe call it lower vibration feelings. But I was so good at running away from it that I couldn't even kind of recognize it. And leading up to it, for months, I had symptoms where I had trouble sleeping. So it doesn't matter how much time I slept in bed, how good was my sleep hygiene. I spent thousands of dollars on setting up like the right sleep environment. I had, the air conditioned mattress. I had the perfect dark room. I had the right humidity, the right temperature, like, all set. And I would meditate before going to sleep. I would block out blue light, like do all the things. And I
Did you
still
feel
couldn't
like
sleep
you've
very
over
well.
optimized it? There was like this over optimization of your sleep, to go into so many details that it was too much already?
I have over optimized my entire life. So my entire life looked like a self-help book. And I had a big epiphany, what I call the micros and macros of life. And I'll tell you about the burnout, which leads to the over optimization. I'll share that in just a moment. I just want to share a few more of the symptoms. So
Of course.
sleep doesn't matter how perfect everything was. I didn't recover very well from exercise. So it doesn't matter, I've been training my whole life. I'm an athlete, but I just couldn't recover. I would always have physical pains in my body. That was definitely a big one. Lack of productivity. So I couldn't work as much as well as I wanted to. Diminishing ambition. I used to want to, do huge, exciting things and help so many people. And suddenly I just wanted to live in a cabin in the woods and retreat from people. And I thought I was somehow growing up or maturing or like growing out of these silly ideas, but I was just going downhill spiral. Those were some of the physiological symptoms that were very clear, and constantly elevated stress levels. It doesn't matter how many vacations I got, how many massages I got, like always freaking stressed. So those were the symptoms leading up to it. And then after the day in Copenhagen, I realized I had a burnout. I decided to take 2 weeks away from work so I could figure out what's going on. And during those 2 weeks, I had this epiphany. It just came to me one day so clear. I didn't like logically come to this conclusion, but suddenly the answer was right in front of my face. It's what I call the micros and macros of life. That was the biggest lesson, I think, of this entire journey. The micros are all the tools. It's all the things we do, or tools that we use. What I would call everything that you read in a self-help book, right? So
Yes.
my entire life looked like a self-help book. I would wake up in the morning at 6 in the morning. I would meditate exactly for 20 minutes. I would go for a 10-minute walk, do my incantations. I would exercise exactly for 45 minutes. Then every 10 minutes of my life was chunked out. And I wouldn't even meet with friends one-on-one because I thought I was wasting time. I would organize a group dinner and then meet with everybody together. And now I realize how ridiculous that sounds. But I thought I was being efficient. I was hustling. I was being, I was optimizing my time. So those are the micros. And I was so good at the micros. The macros are all the things that actually really matter in life. The macros are, what's the connection you have with your family? What's the relationship you have with your friends? What is the quality of the relationship you have with yourself, with your own emotions? What's the relationship you have with your God, if you believe in one or gods? What is the quality of the romantic relationship if you have one? What is the relationship and quality of the relationship you have with nature? All these things, all these relationships, I conveniently, and what is your purpose? What's your mission? And you don't have to know what it is, but are you seeking it? Are you looking for it? If somebody asks you the question of, if you had a 1 year to live, would you change anything, right? And I completely ignored and pushed all of the macros to the side for the sake of the micros, right? So I wasn't in touch with my family. I ran away. I wasn't having close relationship with friends. I wasn't nurturing them. I was in the wrong romantic relationship and I didn't have the courage to end it. I was no longer following my mission. I was just doing a job because it was bringing a lot of money. And so all of these macros are pushed aside, which my theory is that was what resulted in the burnout, was the over optimization of my life and ignoring the macros. And just to add, I'm not saying the tools are wrong. All these micros are great things. I still meditate, I still exercise, I still do all these, I use the tools that we know that are helpful, but I know they're just tools. They're not the end in and of itself. The priority is the macros. That's where I put my energy. That's where I put my focus. That's where I put my goals. It's not on the micros, it's on the macros.
So beautifully said. And you put it so clearly. And what I've heard from you say as well, and I think we had a similar conversation before about this, but I remember you mentioned that, and my takeaway from this was, as you just said, micros are still good. They're tools that, in my opinion, enable you to have these better connections with yourself, with your family. Because let's be honest, like if you're not working out, if you're not creating energy in your life and in your body, and you're not feeling, your well-being is low, you're not going to have energy to be productive. You're not going to have energy to connect meaningfully with your family, your friends, or loved ones, right? So I'm very happy that you mentioned that. It was, from what I understood, was that the tools were not necessarily wrong or bad, but the way that you've over optimized, the way you've put so much importance on them, created this persona that was detached from all the macros. And I'd love to follow up with this middle part, because you said micros here, macros here. What is the bridge? What was the tools that you used, or what was the new ways of thinking that helped you shift your mindset to being able to refocus, being able to look within? If you could share to the listeners the tools that enabled you to actually realize what you just said, one thing. Secondly, bridge the gap between the micros and the macros.
Yeah, so the first thing I did, well, there's a lot of things I did, to be honest. I've changed my entire life. I think if you would have asked me the question of, if you had 1 year to live, if you asked me that 2 years ago at the burnout, I changed everything in my life to arrive to the point where I'm here today.
Let's then bring us back to that time, because I think it will be immensely valuable for our listeners to know what helped you, and especially men that struggled with the same, or struggling right now with the same situation, where they find themselves in front of that laptop needing to send that email, or in front of the office that they have to go in every day, and they just cannot bring themselves to do it because there's something deeply wrong.
The first thing I did, the by far most valuable, important thing, was to create space from this. Is to create space physically, mentally, emotionally, to step away and do that. Now, I am in tremendously luxurious position where I could just stop working without financial consequences. So what I did is I simply stopped working to create distance from the work, from everything, to give myself the time. I went to Costa Rica and Guatemala, became a full-time hippie, didn't wear shoes for a month and just did cacao ceremonies and mezcal and the things that hippies do. And it is,
how would you say if someone couldn't have the same luxury as you had, how would you recommend them to do the same?
yeah. So there's variations of that you can do. And there are variations of that I do still today, because this is a healing journey. And it's like going to the gym. You got to continue working on it. It's not like I did one epiphany and suddenly I'm happy for the rest of my life and all is good. This, what I call the darkness, comes back every once in a while. And with practice, the dark periods are smaller and smaller, and the light periods are bigger and bigger. But I had, so I'll give you a perfect example. 2 days ago, I had this darkness come over me in the afternoon. So I'm working on a new project now, and I was doing my stuff in the morning. And then came lunch. And after lunch, I just felt so much incredible resistance. And I was doing this mental wrestling with my mind, trying to like trick it. And I was like, oh, if you do this, I'll give you this reward. If we get this done, then we can do this. Like I was just doing these mental gymnastics of just trying to like wiggle my way around it. And then I was like, wait a second, what am I doing here? I'm like fighting inside of me and like balancing these forces. And the battle is the thing that's not good. So I have the beautiful park next to my home. So I stopped everything I was doing at 8 p.m. I walked to the park with my journal and I sat down and I started to journal. And I got the clarity, I got the epiphany. And 20 minutes later, I felt incredible. But for good 6 hours before that, I was doing the mental gymnastics and struggling and fighting. And all it took was 20 minutes and I was clear. It was creating the space. And I think what we do, I think this is the most important distinction. Inherently inside, we know that we need the space. We know that we need it. But instead of getting space, we get distracted. So we sit down in front of Netflix, we turn on a show, we turn off our brain for 2 hours, and we watch whatever thing. Or you go out with your buddies and you have a couple of drinks, so you numb the feeling and you go away. Or you turn on porn and then you get excited for half an hour. Whatever it is, we have all these tools that are accepted and used in society, or video games, whatever it is. And I'm not saying that sitting on a couch and enjoying movies is a bad thing, or going out with your friends is a bad thing. But if you're using it, what is the intention? If you're using it to numb the emotions so you can forget about this fucking feeling that you have inside, the darkness that something is really wrong, if you're running away from it, that's when it's not good. And so the difference is, are you distracting yourself or are you creating space so that you can get the clarity? And it's incredible because when you are in that darkness, it feels like you don't have the energy to do anything. You don't want to do, you just don't want to, you don't want to do nothing. You don't want to go out to a park and journal. Like, you just want to forget about it. So Netflix is the easiest thing to do, or whatever tool that you're using, right? Turn off the brain and forget about it.
Yes.
But I think by far the best thing you can do is shut everything off. Turn off the phone, turn off the fucking screens, get away from people, be alone, ideally in nature. But if you can't be in nature, close yourself in your room and turn off everything and just sit there. For me, journaling helps tremendously. Journaling is a great tool for me. I've been doing it for a very long time. And I think it's, for me personally, a more powerful tool than meditation. But there are different flavors of the same thing. For some people, meditation works better. But be in silence, without screens, alone. And if you can do 10 minutes, do 10 minutes. If you can do a year like I did, do a year. But you'll be shocked.
So beautifully said.
Yeah. You'll be shocked what you'll learn about yourself, what kind of insights, and how much release you can get when you just stop fucking running away from a thing. And it's the scariest thing when you're having all these emotions and you feel the darkness and you know, and I think it's the saddest thing. Like, I know, I feel the potential inside of me. I know the gifts I can share with this world. And I was so sad that I felt like I couldn't share those gifts. Like, you have this feeling like there is more to life. Like, you got more to give. You got more to share. You have more love. You have all these things. But instead, we kind of let that just dwindle down. And I think that's what made me sad. And that was the driving force. It was like, I want to share these gifts with the world. And so if you can stop running away from the darkness and just sit with it, you're going to learn some beautiful things about yourself. And you might be surprised how quickly they go away. And maybe they won't go away quickly. Maybe it'll take a long time. It's a journey.
How would you, and it's so beautifully said, and I love the way you described it. And you mentioned journaling, and I completely second that. It is something that I've been using as my tool as well, among breath work, meditation, and ice baths that we both love so much. But I want to bring you back to, let's say, if someone decides, okay, I'm gonna try journaling, for example, how they could build that small habit of journaling every day, trying to welcome those feelings that are coming up. How would you say they treat it as going to the gym? How would you build that habit? Or in
Yeah,
fact,
that's a
any
good
habit?
question. Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't think, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer this question. I'm not like an expert on journaling. I can share you my personal practice, and but there's other ways to do it. But for me, journaling has been a tremendously helpful tool when I am in this struggle and in this dark period. So for me, journaling is not a daily practice right now. It is, I have my dedicated journal, and when things come up that I need to process, I create the space, whether I go in a park or I turn off the screens and I sit at home, whatever I do. And I just write the journal, and I give myself as much time as I need. And I process and I think out loud. That's been my written journal journey. I am currently working on a company called Vitality Therapeutics, where we published a voice journaling app. And so that's another thing I use, where you record how you feel, and it could be whatever, 30 seconds or 5 minutes. And in the app, we give you a vitality score. So based on your emotions and what's going on inside of you, using artificial intelligence to give you a score, we transcribe the journal so you have it saved. We take out highlights. So you can look at a journal from a month ago and you have bullet points on what happened. And we give you emotional insights. There's psychoanalysis, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's Socratic questioning. The questions that a therapist might ask, we also ask you. So we can see, oh, so it looks like you're struggling with this and this. So people can check out the app if they want to use a kind of a voice option. And if you're interested in journaling as a practice, I highly recommend checking out Anajuma, Anajuma, on YouTube. She is what I would call an expert on journaling. She also has beautiful journals that you can get from her. And she talks specifically about the different practices of journaling that you can do. And there's some beautiful work that you can do.
Thank you for sharing those resources with us. Yeah, I second that a million times, because this is something that I used to say, oh, journaling is this thing. And I never felt the power that it could bring, because I never applied myself enough, to the point that I was met with so much emotionals and emotional instability at some stage in my life, that I didn't see anything else that I could turn to, because meditation wasn't working. And then I discovered journaling as well. It's one of the reasons I've created a prompt ebook. Probably one of my first digital products is prompt ebook to help men journal. And I'm very happy that you mentioned this. Coming back to the main part of this question, where you were saying you have created this intentional space, and you were so fortunate to have the financial resources to take time off. What else would you put there that someone could do to help themselves?
Yeah. So first thing is creating the space, because when you are in the middle of this roller coaster, it's really hard to think. It's really hard to get clarity. You need to get clarity. So creating a space was number one. Once I had the space, I got the epiphany about micros and macros. And I started to make the very difficult decisions and actions that I knew I had to do. I just didn't have the courage. So I ended the relationship I was in. That was a wrong relationship. And both of us were suffering. And it was really difficult, but I had to end it. I left the job that I was in, and it's this company that I helped to start and scale and grow. And it exploded. We had 20 million users, and my incentives were set up in a way that each month I stayed, I made a lot of money. Just the incentives were created so that, the longer you stay, the more money you make.
Of
And
course.
I remember so clearly, which was interesting, but the timing of the burnout, because it was in the summer, it was around August. And I remember in the beginning of the year, like January, I told myself, okay, I'll quit in June, July. The summer, I'm going to quit. I'm going to walk away. I know it's a lot of money I'm leaving on the table, but I'm going to walk away. And I didn't. And in August, my body was like, you made a promise and then you didn't commit to it. And so we're going to shut it down whether you like it or not. And so I left a ton of money on the table, but I walked away. Well, honestly, at this point, I didn't really have a choice because I couldn't do the work anymore. It's like, but I had to do it. So leaving the company, which was difficult financially, not like a rational good decision, but this is beyond rational decisions, and just pure finances. That was the second big decision. And then, reconnecting with my family, reaching out to them, being available for them, and traveling and seeing them, reconnecting with my friends and spending a lot of time with my friends and nourishing my friendships one-on-one and really loving it. And started to take all these decisions. So that was kind of fixing what was broken before, the making decisions that I knew I should have done before. That was one part. The other part of it was actual healing, because I've done damage and I've suppressed things for so long that I had to do work to let them come out. So what worked for me in terms of doing the work, number one is psychedelic therapy. So I did a big journey with psilocybin with my good friend Martin. He's guidedbymartin.com, I think is the website, or guided by Martin on Instagram. He's a professional, and he has helped me do the journey, which is tremendously helpful. And at the end of that journey, I got the big insight of what I said: forget about the castles, focus on the bricks. So that was one part of psychedelic journey. Another part was therapy, so actual doing psychotherapy, and I'm still doing therapy, which works great for me, and I'm enjoying the insights I'm getting. So therapy, and I think those were the two biggest chunks of the work.
And with these two chunks of the work being mentioned, especially the therapy, I don't know exactly what type of therapy you do, but could you share maybe some of the thoughts that were going through your mind at a time when you were obviously healing through this part of and going through this part of growth and signing up to therapy, finding a therapist? I'm sure it's not easy task, and trying these modalities, because June, we're recording this in June. It's not going to be published in June, but it's still a Men's Mental Health Month, and I'd love to draw attention to the stigma that is still there in today's world, where everyone has their voice and everyone can be heard. I still feel a lot of men suffer in silence, and they suffer because the stigma that's around men needing help, and men who are a lot of times, like you, very highly performance driven people. Like you mentioned, you're an athlete, you're leading companies. They struggle, and because there's so much pressure, they don't ask for help. And sometimes, unfortunately, until it's too late. I'd love for you to maybe speak to those who are considering getting help, but they don't know how. They don't know maybe how to find someone who could help them. How would you go about that if you had to do it again?
Yeah, so women have higher rates of depression, but once depressed, men have higher rates of suicide because they don't seek help.
Yes.
I felt, even before I started seeking for therapy, but when I realized I had the burnout and I had like challenges I need to work on in my emotions and mental health, I felt embarrassed. I felt guilty. I remember I went to my team, to my guys that I was doing the company with, and I said, this was like when I realized I had the burnout. The first thing I said, guys, I need to take 2 weeks off to figure out what's going on. And I felt so guilty. I felt like I was asking for a free vacation. I felt like, who's to say that I'm just being lazy? Maybe I'm just making this up in my head, and I'm giving myself an excuse so I can take a vacation, and while everybody else. And then I was sitting at home when I took the 2 weeks off, and all I could think about is the rest of my team is working and hustling, and they're building this company and increasing our net worth, and I'm just sitting at home doing nothing. And I felt so tremendously guilty. I felt ashamed. I felt ashamed that I needed help. I felt like I wasn't good enough of a man because, for example, the other three founders, they could continue working and they had the same stress, they had the same thing, they had the same everything, worked the same hours, put in the same amount of energy, but I was the one that needed time. I feel like a lesser man. I felt like I was letting them down. I felt like I was letting my girlfriend at the time down. And it took me a really long time to admit this to my friends and my family. To my family, the longest. I was ashamed to tell this to my dad because I think when you look at our grandfathers and fathers, they just, they were surviving. So they had to do the work and they were powering through. And
Yes.
mental health wasn't a conversation. Like burnout wasn't a thing. Depression wasn't a thing. And I felt like I was like weak. I felt like a weakling. Yeah. Guilt and shame were probably the strongest emotions at the time. And it started to go a really dark spiral. And I'm tremendously lucky that this is how I perceived it. It's not how the outside world reacted at all. My team, the guys are like, of course, take time. You worked incredibly hard for years, pulled, insane hours, and that, like, of course, take time
Of
life.
course.
My girlfriend at the time, she saw what was happening. She knew I had a burnout. And so she was tremendously supportive and tremendously helpful and said, of course, like whatever you need to do it. My friends were incredibly supportive. What shocked me the most is later on, after I did half a year of time off and I did Guatemala and Costa Rica, and after the hippie, and I opened up to strangers as a hippie, which is the easiest thing because there's no consequences. Then I could open up to friends and family, and then finally I would open up publicly, where I wrote an article, I published a podcast, I did an Instagram post, and what shocked me was this was by far the most engagement I got on content on anything I've done. So many people wrote to me and said, I'm going through the same thing. I feel the same way. So many people and friends, people that are close to me that I had no idea because you would never know because we're so good at hiding it. People in my family that I knew nothing about said, listen, don't tell anybody, but I'm going through this and this. And so the biggest takeaway was like, you have no idea how many people are going through these things inside because we're so good at hiding it. And in the professional world, we just call it stress, which is the high performer word for fear. It was truly shocking to me how many people, and to this day, people write to me, it's like, oh, I saw this and this post or this really resonated and I'm going through the same thing. What would you recommend? It's when you are in it, you feel like you're the only one. You feel like you're the weak person because everybody else seems to be just doing fine. Everybody else seems to get up in the morning, go do their work, and then they have dinner and they go to sleep. Like everybody's functioning well, but you feel like you're the one that can deal with this world. Where the truth is, everybody's fighting a battle you know nothing about.
Yes. And we cannot judge, right? We cannot never judge someone by just looking at the outside because we never know what's inside, what the battle that they're facing every day to wake up in the morning and go to work, perform in their company, or do whatever that brings food to the table and looks after the family that they have to sacrifice. And I'm very glad that you mentioned all of these things because we suffer in silence as men, and all these feelings that you were saying you were feeling, and I'm so grateful that you shared with us and with the listeners, could be present with any man and any woman. I'm not saying it's only for us exclusively. And it's so interesting you mentioned that the feelings were so internalized, and I felt the same many years ago. They're so internalized that you create the answers of the people that are around you, right? You think the way they gonna judge you because you judge yourself so hard And then in reality, it's completely different. And the whole thread of this whole question, I think, if we could put one, is being true to what's happening to you, accepting that truth, but also sharing truthfully and honestly how you feel, what you're going through, and might I say, unapologetically, don't give a fuck about everything else. Because in reality, you're fighting for your life.
Yeah,
This is
and
your
I
life.
think I agree 100%. And well, first we create this mental dynamic where we say this is happening to me, where the truth is this is happening for me. It's happening for us. And you don't see it in that way. And honestly, I'm so grateful in hindsight for the burnout, because if I would have continued on that path, if I would have succeeded in all of the things that I was going in, and 20 years later I would catch myself, I would fucking jump off a cliff because I would have been miserable, right? And
Mm.
so I'm so grateful that it came up, because it brought my attention to the things I needed to do. The burnout, these feelings, they're there for a reason. It's a sign. It's to get your attention. When you have a stomach ache, something is hurting, that's the gift. Body's telling you, look, something is wrong. Stop eating all the shit food you're eating, or whatever it is. It's your way. It's your body telling you this is a warning signal. This is an action signal, and it's the same with emotions.
Listening, right? Listening to our body, listening to our thoughts, listening is, we have a tremendous amount of symptoms that we can feel, right, as humans. And because, as you mentioned, we live in these really fast-paced societies and cities and jobs, and everything is required of us, then we just stop listening. I think this is a beautiful way to segue into something that I'd love to ask you as well, and it's how now you find joy in life, how you gone through all of these changes and healing. How do you find joy? How do you find awe in every day? And how you allow yourself to listen to the symptoms? Where we left off was the question of, I forgot.
Where do you find joy?
Yes, where? Oh, yes. So, yes, the question was, where do you find joy? Where do you find the contentment right now in every day? And I think that was it.
Yeah, this leads me to an author and a few books that have been helping me tremendously in this way. So the author is called Michael A. Singer. He wrote 3 books. The first one was Surrender Experiment, then The Untethered Soul, and then Living Untethered. Living Untethered is the one I've read this year. It is by far the most important book I've read in the last 18 months. Highly, highly recommend it. Living Untethered. The idea is that stuff happens in the world, and we have our own idea of how stuff should happen. But it almost never happens the way we want it to happen, because we create it somehow for some reason. I have an idea of, maybe I wanted you to ask me certain questions in a podcast, or I didn't want the noise, or I didn't want the plane to fly around, or I didn't want it to be so hot today. Like, I had all these, I woke up with 1,000 preferences, and 99% of my preferences get ignored by the universe, and the world just happens on its own. It's got nothing to do with me. But what we do is that my neighbor makes a noise, or the plane flies around, or the AC doesn't work just right, and then I don't like it. And I'm like, and I create physical tension in my body. You know how that feels. For men, we store a lot of stuff in our stomach, in our hips, in our lower back, in our shoulder blades.
We do.
It's stress, right? We accumulate all this stuff, and every time it happens, you tense up a bit more. You add another thing in there. And this happens all day, every day, throughout the day, because we woke up with 1,000 preferences, and 99% are not rooted in reality. It's just whatever. We just, something happened. It's trauma with a small t, where, when I was a kid, our living room was always cool. And so now when it's hot, I don't like it. Or, I go to the same bakery every morning and their bread was sold out and I don't like it. And so like we tense up and create all this tension. And the idea of living untethered is let go of all of this preferences, all of this intention. Every time something comes up, it hits your stuff. That's what he calls it. It hits your stuff. And if you can let go and relax in that moment, you release the stuff. And it's a beautiful thing to just let go. Because all we do every day, we have all these preferences to push our way, and everybody does it. And it creates so much unnecessary stuff because the outside world has nothing to do with us, with what we want. It's happening regardless of whether you like it or not. It's just out there. And he talks about a beautiful example in the book, like, somewhere in New Zealand, somebody just dropped a pancake on the floor. It's got nothing to do with you. That doesn't make you angry. But if somebody does it in your living room, it'll drive you nuts. Why? It's got nothing to do with you. It's just happening out there and you're just witnessing it, right? And I find that and I've been practicing this for months now, of letting go, of releasing, of lovingly accepting everything that happens, because it's a gift. It's happening for us, not to us. When you release enough stuff, there is joy there. There's joy naturally. Our default state is joy and gratitude and excitement and love. Like, love is the natural state. But we cover it up with all these preferences of how things should be and how I want everything to be and how I want my girlfriend to talk to me and how frequently to send a message and how she should communicate with others and how she should touch me, and like all these preferences and ideas in the world. And if you can get rid of all of that and just accept people for who they are, it's a gift to them, because that says, I love you as you are right now. Not to say you don't help them grow, not to say you're not gonna, if somebody crosses your boundaries, then you tell them like, look, this makes me feel that in that way. But it's letting go of the first reaction. If somebody crosses your boundary, we tense up and then we want to fight them, or we want to, however we react. But if somebody crosses your boundary, and then you can like let go, relax, relieve the anger, anxiety, and stress, and then come to them and be like, listen, what you did is not right. This is how it made me feel. This is what I would like you to do in the future. It makes all the difference in the world. And so if you can relax and accept everything and let go and create a distance between what happens in your reaction so that you can relax and then you can do something with it, then joy and love and that lightness and beautiful shining just is there on its own. And it should be there by default. That's our nature. We just cover it up with advertising mostly. My coach, David Allison, who's been my performance coach for a couple of years, he came from the Tony Robbins organization. He now works with men, and his mission is to improve men's mental health. He's got this beautiful saying. He said his life philosophy is that you can react. There are three ways you can respond to life when something happens. He said, one, you can react, which is the first initial gut reaction, and we tense up and react. Number two is you can respond, meaning you can take some time back, create space, let go, and respond. You decide to respond. You react because you're an animal, but you decide to respond. And the third one, it says you take the time, you let go, and then you ask yourself, what do I want to create from this? And I think if you can be in that state of mind all the time, and it's super hard, right? When you're in a rush and you're going on a date with this beautiful woman, and this person in front of you is driving fucking 5 kilometers below the speed limit, and there's traffic, and you're sweating, and like it's hard to just let go and be like, oh, whatever, it's all good sunshine. It's really hard. But I find that for me, this was the key. This was the answer. And I'm not very good at it, and I've been doing it for months now. It's a practice, but there are moments where it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful inside that it doesn't matter what happens on the outside. It's still because it's beautiful on the inside. Because the truth is, you could have the most incredible life around you, but if you're suffering inside, then you're in suffering. It doesn't matter. And I know that feeling. I bought my dream car. I moved to Portugal and I could travel the world. And there's still moments that the darkness comes over. And so it doesn't matter what car you're driving. It doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank account. It doesn't matter how big your company is. It doesn't matter how attractive the person is that you're on a date with. Like, all of those things are absolutely meaningless if you're suffering on the inside. But if it's beautiful on the inside, then you magnify the love and the beauty, and everything on the outside is amazing. And I've got glimpses of it. Like, I'm mostly talking from theory, what I've seen in others, what I've read. I've had tiny glimpses, and that's why I'm sharing it.
So beautiful. Thank you for that. It was very, very thoughtful, but also I hear that you are inquiring deeper and deeper within yourself. And I have a fortune to know you from many different angles now. And this is another one that I'm discovering of you as a friend, as a man, as someone who is so eloquently able and equipped to share his message, because sometimes as well we are going through stuff but maybe not necessarily are able to speak it, and I'm very grateful to you as a man to be able to speak about these things, and my gratitude is immense. Thank you. And I'm very glad that you mentioned someone like Michael Singer, because it's something that if I ever create this Notion template of all the books that you should read as a man by 30, another viral post, he will be definitely there. I think it's a must read, especially the first two books you mentioned. Obviously, they're his story and Untethered Soul and Surrender Experiment. I have not read the one that you have mentioned, the one that is the most important, The Living Untethered, and I'll definitely check it out. So thank you for that. Since we're already there, this is a segment of the podcast that I always ask my guests. You kind of did part of it. What would be the books or the podcasts or a media or a content that you right now consume or consumed in the recent time that brought you the most joy, helped you heal, helped you grow? What would you recommend to other men to sink their teeth in? Watch something that they want to get something out of, rather than, as you mentioned, Netflix or something that's numbing.
My number one would be the book Living Untethered. By the way, for me, that's the best one of the three, so I'd highly recommend you read that one. Number two, he also has a course. So I'm going through the course now, I'm watching it. It's basically him talking about all of this. But it's just, if you want to, it's a pro move. If you want to dive really deep, he's got a course where he talks about it for a few hours. One of the books I keep getting back to is The Way of the Superior Man. This is the one book that I've reread the most in my life. I think I read it at least once a year for the last decade. I would say it's somewhat controversial, and not
Mhm.
everything there I would agree with or follow blindly, but incredibly powerful. And I think especially in this age where we're creating a lot more balance in society, we're creating a lot more opportunities for women as well. We're creating a lot more acceptance. We're doing some amazing things, and we're moving in the right direction as a society. It could also be confusing to be a man. We create a lot of neutrality in the workplace, which is great, but we also create neutrality in our intimate relationships, which kills intimacy, kills romance. And you need both. You need the partnership, but you also need the polarities. And I think this book is a tremendous guide on, it's a really good manual and how to be a man, if I should say. It's kind of a silly way to put it, but it is, confusing. Our grandfathers and fathers' roles were clearly defined. It's been very clear on what does it mean to be a man. I'd say for us and for the upcoming generation, it's very confusing.
Yes.
And it's almost gotten to the point where men are guilty for being men. We have incredible gifts to share with the world and with the women. We need each other, and taking away our gifts or feeling guilty for being men, or all these things that where kind of the society is going right now, that's we're all losing. So the way of the superior man has been great, not just for the male-female dynamic, but also related to the bigger purpose and mission and the way you show up in life in general. So I think that's been a
Yes.
really good one for me. I'd say those two have been the most powerful.
Where it comes to a podcast or some medium different than books, what would you recommend that you've recently stumbled upon?
Right now, I'm listening podcasts for business because I enjoy it. So I don't have, this is kind of, it's the opposite of what we're talking about. But I still, enjoy business. I still sharing. I love
We're
sharing my
all
gifts.
men.
I
We're
love.
all building something. We're creating something. So as when you think it's of value, I love for you to share it.
Right. So because I'm building a lot of stuff right now, I'm in a part of my life where I'm building. There's two podcasts I listen to the most. One is called the All In podcast, which is basically for very experienced business guys and billionaires just talking about what's happening in the world. So it's really good for the macro of to understand where the economy is going, how it's working, how are the public markets, the private markets, just like macro finance and big picture stuff. Sometimes a bit of policy and economics mixed in there. That's really, really good for that. I love that for the big stuff. And then I listened to My First Million, which is two guys just talking about different business ideas, and it's more on the micro and the small things. But I love the fact that they are honest, they are imperfect, they share transparently their ideas and opinions, and that's what makes them very approachable. And I've learned a lot on business from these two podcasts.
That's great. Thank you for sharing those, and thank you for sharing that whole segment. I think it's always valuable to get a perspective on books and podcasts and media that we all as men can grow and learn from. And I
I
highly
have one more.
second. One more. Amazing. Yes, let's go.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it just came to me. There's
Yeah.
actually a documentary that I remember I saw, which is fantastic, that I would recommend. The documentary is called The Work, and it's a story about a group of volunteers, all men, who go into a prison and they do a group therapy session once a year. They take like a long weekend, and it's about 20 volunteers from the outside, free men, and 20 prisoners. And they do a group therapy session. It's guided by counselors, but it's a group therapy session. And it's incredibly powerful. And one thing that was interesting to see is that it was actually the prison inmates that tend to help the people that are free and on the outside. And it was so wonderful to see that they're so similar. They're the same thing. The stories were so aligned, and that we're not that far away. We're not that different. It's just that, somebody got caught when they exploded and somebody didn't, for example. It's difference between prison or not. Or, skin color is the difference, or where you grew up is difference, or the neighborhood you're in is the difference. But inside we're also different. And so
Yes.
this was a wonderful documentary called The Work. It's a bit hard to find. I couldn't find any of the major streaming services. You might have to look around the internet for a while, but a very, very good book.
When I'm gonna produce the podcast and then when I'm gonna do the show notes, I'm gonna try. Maybe I'll reach out to you after this, and I'd love to hear where you found it. So we can make it available. I'm going to also link the books that you mentioned. Yeah, for sure. So switching up to the next segment, and this is a more unexpected one. So the question that has been asked by the previous guest that you're going to get to ask as well, someone who is going to be next, who you don't know. They asked this: I'd love to know what the person in front of me uses to self-medicate.
Self-medicate. Oh, it's a beautiful question. As I've been doing this deeper work, I've been also bringing more awareness to my addictions. One of the biggest ones for me has been sugar. I've been really, really addicted to sugar, processed sugar and sweets and all of that. And even though I train like a beast and I burn through so many calories, so you can't see it on me, but I would be very overweight if I didn't train the way I train. And it doesn't mean that I'm not gaining, visceral fat and the fat between the organs, and it's still very dangerous. I'm just in a position. I'm just very lucky that I had certain genes and I have certain habits where it's not visible. But definitely, sugar has been the high. Like carbohydrates and sugar in any form has been the go-to drug. That's definitely number one. Number two, caffeine. Very strong addiction to caffeine and coffee. That's the one that I'm also fighting now. So I'm only doing one caffeinated beverage a day, one caffeinated coffee a day. I'd say pornography definitely was a very strong drug. It's incredibly powerful. It's designed to overtake our attention in such a strong way that it's really hard to fight against it. So that was definitely, for a big part of my life, a very strong addiction. And then I would say rape as well was a struggle with the indigenous tobacco that's used in kind of a spiritual communities, which is a highly addictive substance. And it was addictive for me when I was stressed because it brought like this instant meditation state where I was like instantly
Yes, it's
grounded and
very
calm.
grounding.
It's very
Very
grounding,
grounding,
and it's
yes.
beautiful to be in that state. And I think if you use it, properly, it's all good. But if you use it for a quickie in between meetings, just so you're not stressed, that's not a good way to do it. So I'd say that was definitely a problem as well. Yeah, I don't know if that
And
answers the
thank you
question
for
properly.
sharing. No, you did. You did very well. And I'd love to ask you about two of these, and how you were able to get better and what helped you the most. And one is sugar, because that's something, I mean, I'm actually right now asking not for the listeners, I'm asking for myself. Because I've been known like that in Portugal. And you might remember the dinners we had that I tend to order dessert first. And I always say, oh, because I might not live till actually after the starter and the main course, I might not live until the dessert, so I want to have it now. But in reality, I have a sweet tooth, especially when I'm going out for dinners. I don't consume a lot of sugar during the day or in the house, but I have to recognize it's something that it is of a very addictive and very gratification kind of situation, where like if I go out, I gratify myself or whatever I was doing earlier on in the day. I was like, I'm gonna have a dessert, and sometimes I have two, one at the beginning and one at the end, and I laugh it off. But in reality, it's sugar that I don't really need in my body. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and maybe for the listeners as well. There's so many men that are struggling not only with sugar, but in food in general as a self-medication and stress relief. That's saying, eating your problems and your issues is as real for women as real for men. So I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. For me, it's been, and I think of it as a 4-step process. Any of these things, whether it's sugar or it's porn or whatever, anything else, I think it's a 4-step process. And for me, number one is education. Number two is awareness. Number three is alternatives. And number four is habit. So education is to learn everything you can possibly learn to gain the leverage. So intellectually, you know everything that you can possibly know. The awareness of actually tracking it somehow to really bring into the conscious awareness. Alternatives, because it's really hard to just stop something, but if you can switch the habit for something else. And then finally, it's creating the habit and then, continuing from there. So for example, with sugar, for me, it started with education, which for me was learn everything I can about sugar and the impact on my body and how it works. It started off because I look at and I train well. So I look at myself and I'm like, oh, 6-pack, all good. Nothing to worry. Like I'm probably just different. But then I started to learn that, you have fat in between the organs and you can have visceral fat and all these things that are not visible to the body, but are more dangerous. And so just because it's not visible, just because you're not overweight doesn't mean you're not suffering inside. And so I discovered this, and then I ordered a glucose monitor. So it's a little glucose sensor you stick under your skin, and it measures your glucose levels. And so then I would very much see, I would have, and this was one of the biggest insights, is that I remember one lunch, I wasn't really hungry, and I was in a group lunch, but I was wearing the glucose monitor. So I'm like, I'm gonna have something healthy, but I'm not really hungry, so I'll just have a smoothie, right? So I got like a protein banana smoothie. So just protein powder, banana, and I don't know what else was in there, but this was what it said on the menu, and like plant milk. And I got the smoothie, and I got this gigantic spike in glucose, like diabetes territory, massive. I was like, what's going on? And then I learned that when you blend the banana or fruits, it actually gives you a massive spike in glucose, because in nature, we never had blended fruits. It never occurred naturally. When you separate the fiber from the rest of the stuff, that's when you get into trouble. And so I was like, okay, no more smoothies. If you want to have a banana, have the whole banana, because then your body can process it.
So if what you're saying is if you eat the banana in the normal raw state, it's fine. It wouldn't give you as a high sugar spike, but if it's blended altogether, it's super quickly absorbable.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had the data. I
Mm.
would have a banana and see the spike, and then I would have a smoothie and see a massive spike. A banana is very high in glucose, so it still gives you a very big spike. Now I would rather have like blueberries or other fruits, because then I would see every single fruit what kind of glucose spike I get. And the same with breakfast. If I'll have like white bread for breakfast, then obviously there's a massive spike. And then all day my glucose is oscillating. And when you have these oscillations in glucose levels, that's when you have cravings all day, because when you drop and you want to fill it up. And so it just goes all day. So it brought a lot of light into what I was eating, how it was affecting me. Then I could see like I would have if yeah, I have the same, I tend to eat the same lunches and same dinners and same breakfast. And so I could see how it affects my body. And this was really, really educational, massive, massive insight. And so that was the first thing:
Mm.
education, learn about it, awareness. So tracking it with the glucose sensor.
Yeah.
Um, then is the alternatives. So, for example, instead of having a banana smoothie, I'll have blueberries if I really want to get some sugar. Or one that's been helping me tremendously is actually I order now 100% chocolate. So I used to do a lot of chocolate, like dark chocolate, like 70, 60%, but now I do 100, no sugar at all.
Pure cacao.
And I love it, pure cacao. And so that's the alternative. And so in my fridge, I have a stack full of, and I have one in every backpack. I have one in the office. I have one at home. I have one everywhere, because I know that I get these cravings throughout the day. And if I can just have one like small chunk of 100% cacao, it removes it. So that's the alternatives for me. And then the final one is the habit, like creating, sticking to it. So I have in my bathroom, I have a little chart where I track, make sure that I'm on point, that I train every day. I take a cold shower first thing in the morning. I don't eat sugar. I don't watch porn, all these things. And so I track them, and that's how you create the habit. And so this is the method I've used for everything else as well. And that's worked well for me.
Amazing. Yes, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned you're tracking all of these things, and you mentioned something that I wanted to ask you next, which was porn, and that's a topic that's close again, like sugar. I used to have, I would say, very interesting connection, and I wouldn't say an addiction yet, but a connection with porn where it became my mechanism of stress relief. And not necessarily masturbation, but watching porn, and then maybe half the time masturbation. And it became invading on my life at some stage where I realized this is not a healthy. It became a habit, and then it was not healthy for the way I was looking at many different interpersonal connections, and I'm sure it affected my relationships and the way I was perceiving my own performance and a lot of things in life. And I'd love to share. I'd love for you to share. How did you come about realizing that for yourself, and what helped you to maybe leave it behind?
So for porn, for me, it's been actually very similar to you. It was a way to relax and, stressful day, and you just want to turn off your brain. It was the same like the distraction with Netflix. It's just porn is it's so visceral, right? It just takes all of your attention, and you forget about all of the problems of the day and all the stress, and for a few minutes you could pretend to be experiencing pleasure. So that was kind of gateway into it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was just very frequent, and it was I mean, porn is bad for so many reasons, and we could talk about this for so long, but there's great books about this and all kinds of podcasts and articles and how it's destroying the image that men have, how it makes it difficult for you to enjoy real pleasure in real life, either in your own practice or with a woman. It was, yeah, I mean, it's horrible for so many things. And that was the leverage I use for me, or the education. Again, it starts with the education. So like understanding what it does to your brain, what it does to your behavior, what it does to your expectations, what it does to your sex with real humans is the first step. The second one is awareness. So for me, again, it was tracking it. So just have a simple sheet, paper and pencil in the bathroom, and then I could every day I would mark watch porn, didn't watch porn, and then when you look at it after a month, and if most days you tick a box, you're like, something's off here. So when you have the education, the awareness, and for me, it was really the leverage of focusing on the macros and me wanting to be the best man that I can be for my girlfriend and for the person that I'm with, is to show up in the best way that I can and be the best version of myself. And I know that the best version of myself, the true man inside of me, doesn't watch porn. It doesn't use these guilty pleasures to distract myself from the stress. I deal with the things that I need to deal with, and I relax in constructive ways that help me relax. And then I show up for the woman that I'm with in the best way that I can show up. Because I know that if I'm watching porn and if I'm masturbating and ejaculating all the time, I can't show up with my full presence. I can't show up with my energy. I can't be there for her the way I need to be there for her. And that was my leverage. I just wanted to be the best fucking man that I could be. And I know that
That was your
porn is
why.
not part of it. I know that constant sugar is not part of it. And there's nothing wrong with having a dessert every once in a while. But just, not like me having a croissant every day and dessert and all of that and chocolate. And yeah, so that's why I started to bring awareness to all of these things.
Beautifully said. I'm very happy you shared this with us. And I mentioned while you were speaking, I said that was your why. The leverage at the end, you said it was to show up the best way you could show up as a man. And that was something as well that brought me to stop the cycle. It was a couple of years ago now. I have put myself and the image of the man that I was portraying myself as out there, and I realized that I was lying to myself first about like me and the frequent use of porn as well. And I had to come out to my mentor, and I said to him, "Listen, I'm feeling I'm very close to being addicted to porn and watching it, and because my life at the time was quite stressful." And he helped me as well, and he said, "Listen, what's the most motivating thing for you?" At the time I didn't have a bigger why, but he said to me, "What's the most motivating thing that you could put on the line?" And at the time, because of other struggles that I had, was losing money. So I had to pledge money to him, and for every time I relapsed, I would lose that money. He would make a charitable donation with that amount. It happened so that it was so strong at a time for me that it did not happen, and it was for a good year that I was clean. And after I moved out to Portugal, I relapsed a few times, but I had that, the muscle memory that the relapses were very far few in between. There's a once off and then another months and months without anything. But we all have different mechanism, right? I think it's you so beautifully put the awareness. So first education, awareness. Then the third step is tracking it. Right? Am I right?
Yeah.
And then replacing it and creating a different habit. And I think we all can learn from this. And I'm very glad that you shared this way of dealing with either sugar or porn. So moving on, this is your moment right now, my friend, to ask the future guest a question that you would love to hear answered. And maybe this is a question that is intended to them. Maybe it's a question that you have never been asked on the podcast and you'd love to be asked that question. So this is your time.
A year ago, I was in London and I was traveling to the countryside with some friends. We're on a train, and we're having a lot of fun in this train, and we're sitting there. And one of my friends, he has been collecting this document of the ultimate questions to ask. So he asked his employees and business partners and all the people, and he was trying to find the one question that will reveal the most amount of information about one person, which I thought was interesting. And so we're having this conversation and we're going through the questions, and about like an hour in of this talk, there's an older gentleman that's sitting next to us wearing this very English-like demeanor, wearing a suit. And he turns and looks at us, and he hasn't spoken at all this entire time. He looks at us and he goes, I've met the Queen, and the Queen asks one question to everyone she meets. And she asks, have you come far? And you can interpret it as, did I take a train for an hour? Or in your life, have you come far? So that's the one question that the Queen asked, which I thought was interesting. That's not my question, but I wanted to share the story because I thought it was
that's a great story.
fascinating. Because questions are the power. I'm going to ask one, which recently I was at a dinner with 5 other strangers, and we had these questions on the table that you asked them to find out more. And one just came to my mind. Someone asked that question. And so the question is, describe the last time that you feared for your life. And
I remember
this
that
question can open up a lot of good conversation. So next guest, good luck. Enjoy the question.
Thank you for playing this game with me. I want to applaud you for sharing all your knowledge. Thank you tremendously for being one of the first guests on my podcast. I really deeply, deeply admire your journey. Every insight that you brought to me and to the listeners today is fantastic. And I think you're only started your journey. I think you are uncovering more and more beauty and joy, as we all do. And I think the journey, the moment we start living a life, and when we realize it's about the journey, not the end. So I applaud you, my friend. I'm tremendously grateful for this time with you. And after we finish this recording, I'd love to chat for a few more minutes. So to all the listeners, is there anything that you would like to say to them? A last piece of wisdom? Maybe you want to share something that you're very passionate about right now, something that you're creating and it's bringing your juices to an amazing state, or everything is flowing for you, or where someone who wants to connect with you could find you. It's your time.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all the kind words. I really appreciate it. I am honored to be one of the guests on your podcast. And thank you so much for bringing more light and awareness to this world. I appreciate you. If people want to find out more, you can check out Vitality Therapeutics as a new company that I'm building. Our mission is to use artificial intelligence to bring more joy and help people to feel better. And so we're building tools for people and for therapists and coaches and people like yourself actually as well. So the first product is a voice journal, uses artificial intelligence to give you emotional insights that you wouldn't get otherwise. So you can look up Vitality Voice Journal on the App Store, anywhere in the world, and you should be able to find it. So that's Vitality Voice Journal. And if you want to hear more from me, I also share my stories, and you can check out Darius Mora, Darius Mora on YouTube. I'm Darius Mora on Instagram, Darius Mora Show podcast, if you want to hear more.
Deeply grateful. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.